Hello, I'm Michael Dorr and I wanted to share with you the results of a study that I've done comparing the first year transition experience of students in Edinburgh with those on a transnational education program in China. This is work I did together with my colleagues Sofia, Shan and Debbie Shaw, and Sofia in particular did all of the interviews. So firstly, a couple of words about transnational education. Transnational education is typically where a Western higher education institute sends part of its university over to another non-English speaking country and delivers a program, a degree program delivered in English. And there's an awful lot of these occurring in East Asia, and it's a massively expanding sector. Many of these programs are developed simply by transplanting both the staff and all the learning materials straight to this new context. So one of the things that I wanted to know is, do we really need to do something different? And in particular, are the different challenges of transition for the students starting on these degree programs? Firstly, there's the obvious one. If these are English medium degree programs in non-English speaking countries, there are bound to be some language issues. But also, with these programs in East Asia, and I'm going to be talking specifically about China, there are a lot of cliches that Western academics have about Asian students. They're things like they are spoon-fed facts, or that they're reluctant to speak in class. And the spoon-fed facts refers to their education before going to university, but also that they're very hard-working. These are cliches that make it as far as a lot of academic literature. And there's quite a lot of research done on transition experiences, both of students in the UK on traditional degree programs and of students on English medium instruction programs in Asia. And I wondered if, to a certain extent, the research findings of these studies are more a result of different questions being asked in different places than there being real differences between these students. And a couple of examples I've got here is quotes from studies in English medium instructions programs. Is they expect tutors to spoon feed them this idea that the Asian students are not independent thinkers, or that Asian students do not have much experience in teamwork. They found it difficult to work in a team, especially with members that are not cooperative or are unreliable. Whereas in the UK, typical transition problems include social issues, which I've not quoted here, but that's a commonly quoted thing, or problems using the appropriate academic style or understanding specialist vocabulary. Now, to me, all of these sounded pretty universal. I mean, who does not have problems dealing with uncooperative and unreliable team members? These are things that are generally difficult. So I wondered if, in fact, we would find the same problems for students in both of these different contexts. So we came up with a study taking advantage of the fact that Edinburgh University has a joint degree program with Zhejiang University Biomedical Sciences program based in Haining in Zhejiang province in China. So we carried out a study asking the same question of students based in China and students based in Edinburgh University on loosely similar programs, the same general aims, though the specific content is different. And we used questionnaires at the beginning of first and second year and followed these up with interviews that were more in depth later. So what did we find from these? Did we find that the students are the same, or did we find some of the cliche differences that we might have expected? Well, firstly, on arrival, these interviews and questionnaires at the start of first year. Well, firstly, it's obviously going to be true that learning in English is a major concern for Chinese students. They're going to start a degree program that's entirely in English. It would be amazing if they weren't concerned about that. So that does come up as a major concern. But actually, a great similarity is that in both groups, the idea that learning is now going to be independent at university is very similar for both. It's not that only Chinese students feel this is a new thing. Students in Edinburgh felt this was going to be a new thing as well, and both groups report being slightly anxious typically about their degree. And to back up this comment about independent learning, a quote from one of our Edinburgh students who said that information will not be as spoon-fed as it was earlier in education. And actually the comment about spoon-feeding being a cliche for Asian students was something I wrote on a slide before I got this quote from an Edinburgh student, so it's not just conveniently placed there. But I think a lot of UK domestic students do feel that they are spoon-fed in their pre-university education. So what about, were there any differences? Well, one thing we found is that Edinburgh students tended to be much more focused both on good grades and on career plans, and often these two were linked to each other. So when asked what action you will take, one Edinburgh student said, well, what action they will take to do well in first year was, I'm going to start thinking about future plans and find work experience in relevant fields and working towards good final grades to maximise possible career or future study options. So it's all about getting those good grades to allow them to have a good career later. Whereas Chinese students reported being interested mainly in developing skills, and this is something that's come out on other surveys that we've done over time, is that the Chinese students really want to develop academic and scientific skills. And in the interviews, it seemed to be that the students feel that once they're at university, learning is now for interest. They were used to the idea that learning was just to pass exams at school, but now they feel once they've gone to university, learning is for interest, and that for that reason they want to develop skills. They don't just want to get good grades. And some other differences that we found do fit the sort of cliche idea a bit more, is that Edinburgh students are very concerned with their social life as well as studying. So a typical comment about plans for the first year from an Edinburgh student is that they wanted to have a good balance between studying and socialising. Many of the students specifically mentioned balance, whereas a typical comment from a Chinese student was that they would study hard and try my best to beat deadline and improve my academic skills. And I think this, again, this came out in interviews as well, and it seemed to be that Edinburgh students view university as a step in their life. It's a thing they're going to do, and going to university is all about a complete change in life, whereas a lot of the Chinese students viewed university simply as the next step in their study. It wasn't a life change, and actually many of them had been in boarding school before they went to university. And when they're at university, they live in university accommodation and eat all of their meals in the university cafeteria. So there's not a big life change for them. It's just the next step in their study. So how did the students feel after they'd completed a year of their study? I'm going to show a couple of graphs here, actually, because I think they illustrate some of the big differences very well. Is that when the students were asked what was the most satisfying or enjoyable thing about first year, the most common response for the Edinburgh students was getting to know new people was the most enjoyable or satisfying. Actually, when we just asked them what was enjoyable, not the most enjoyable, that came up very high for Chinese students as well. But it wasn't the most important thing to them. The most important thing, again, was learning new academic skills. Both sets of students were also very much enjoyed and were satisfied by learning about biomedical sciences. But the Edinburgh students, again, were more likely to mention good grades. And again, this comes out even more if you look not on the most satisfying, but just what they found satisfying, is that Edinburgh students focus much more on grades, whereas the Chinese students focus more on skills. And finally, if you ask them about what was challenging, what did they find difficult about their first year at university, we get similar sorts of categories here. Is that the Edinburgh students tended to focus on social things. So what they found challenging was making friends and connections. This wasn't not a concern for Chinese students, it was just a higher priority for the Edinburgh students. And then they also found moving away from family and friends, my hometown, was more difficult. Whereas the Chinese students were more likely to say that they had problems with workload or course contents or managing the demands of studying at this level. So there was much more focus from the Chinese students on work things and the Edinburgh students on social and community aspects. And of course, studying in English came up as a challenge. Again, that's no surprise. Some quotes to back this up is, an Edinburgh student's request for how we should improve their first year experiences, that we should provide more opportunities that are not optional for students in the same course to get to know each other. They really want to get to know each other well. Whereas a Chinese student might typically request something like they wanted to make us to make the first semester busier and the second semester freer. So the focus is much more on work things, whereas the focus for Edinburgh students is on social things. However, the biggest challenge for both lots of students was the same. It was self-organisation and time management. And again, I think that's the idea of independent study. They're now in charge of managing their own time and their own study. And that is the biggest challenge for both sets of students. So, in conclusion, We found that independent study and time management are the main concerns for all students. Edinburgh students are more focused on grades, careers and social life, whereas Chinese students are more focused on skills development and working. We've got some further analysis to do on different learning strategies. It seems that Chinese students are more likely to preview regularly, whereas the Edinburgh students just cram at the end of the year, and the Chinese students place greater importance on study groups. And finally, acknowledgements. This work was funded by the Edinburgh University Principals Teaching Award Scheme, and we got a lot of helpful feedback for people involved in that programme. And obviously I want to thank both lots of students for letting us interview them and use their responses in this presentation. Thank you.